I want to introduce everyone to Jay Dawes, who is someone that I became familiar with through the world of strength conditioning and my capacity with Power Athlete. And not only has he been the VP of the NSCA, but he's also worked with several universities and is currently at OSU. And, some of the things that have drawn me to your work and your research is your involvement with the tactical community and continued involvement in researching a lot of the strength and conditioning and the implications of fitness when it comes to performance and that kind of thing. So does that pretty well surmise, summary, like what you're currently doing? You're actively researching, and then you're also an assistant professor of applied exercise sciences.
Yeah, that's dead on. So I think the only thing that maybe is a little bit unique is I still do actively coach. So doing a lot with Stillwater Police Department and a lot more with Stillwater Fire as of recently, now that some of the COVID restrictions are lightening up. So I think that's been the one thing for me, like career-wise, that's been really important, is to kind of have a good balance between the research, the applied side, because I think really the first half of my career was really in the strength conditioning world and the applied world. And I think when I moved into academia, I kind of thought all of a sudden I needed to switch and become this academic guy. And then I started realizing, like, okay, one, you're probably not a very traditional academic, and probably your strength is going to be the fact that you do have that applied aspect of things. So yeah, for me, it's like really, really important to keep that application side to everything that we do. And I think, Kelly, as you were saying, like, when we're looking at the different research projects that we take on, the big emphasis is that when somebody reads one of our papers, that immediately they know what to do with it. So it's not like okay, I read that paper and now I have no idea where to go. So we try to have like some kind of like real world practical application to it that's usable. So when somebody picks it up, they can apply it immediately.
I love that. I think that's super important. I always think about when we're, regardless of what our discussions are, or when we're kind of putting ourselves through scenarios, it's like, what's the takeaway? I need to have something actionable at the end of the day. And the same thing with the trainings that our department puts on. It's like, I need something tangible that I can walk away with and implement like immediately. And I know we got talking a little bit before we started recording, but I'm curious as how you got into this niche of tactical world, LEO, and that kind of thing with your research.
Yeah, so I was the education director for the National Strength Conditioning Association from 2007 to 2010. And during that time frame, I guess starting in 2006, they actually started working with the Colorado Springs SWAT team. And when I came in as education director, Mark Stevenson, who was the Human Performance Center director, said, "Hey, we've got this program that we've started with our local law enforcement, and I think it's got legs, and I'd like to turn this into an educational program." And so at that point, Mark and I just started kind of moving forward with trying to establish the Tactical Strength Conditioning program with the NSCA. And arguably at that point, I had no idea what I was doing. It's one of those things where I think I kind of had my mindset of, what that population looked like and what they needed to be capable of and things of that nature. And I think, over the last, decade or so, like, working with them boots on the ground, so I think, when we look at, the tactical athlete concept, it's definitely an aspirational concept and something we want to aim for. But I think, originally I kind of had the thought process of, hey, everybody's going to be concerned about their health and fitness, and everybody wants to, do the job to the best of their abilities. And then the more you get into it, you're like, oh, we have some folks that aren't really even healthy human beings. And I'm asking you to do the things that some athletes would do, such as like jumping, sprinting, dragging heavy objects and stuff like that. And you actually might be at risk. So I think it's been one of those things. I've kind of come full circle on it, where, I think, originally we were really selling it based off that tactical athlete concept. And again, fundamentally, I do believe that to be true, that we need to try to aim to train law enforcement officers like athletes, but also recognizing that the entry point has to be wherever they're at. So anyway, that was kind of my launching point, kind of where I got started. So I was at the NSCA for about 3 years. And when I left there, I actually jumped into academia, and my first academic job was at Texas A&M Corpus Christi. So the island university, which, I mean, if you're going to take a job at a university on an island, is not a bad gig. But we got to go down there and reached out to the Corpus Christi Police Department, and did a little bit of testing with their SWAT team, and kind of help some folks out there just with some general questions and whatnot. And I said, hey, I'd really like to jump in and be more involved. What can I do? And they said, well, where we really need help is at the academy level. And so at that stage, really got to jump in with that, and work with the guys down there that were the PTIs, and together we really, I think, built a really good program. And it was one of the best experiences I've ever got to go through. And at that point, there was actually some litigation that was kind of surrounding some different things related to fitness testing and whatnot. So that kind of opened up the door into that space, and understanding what some of the challenges were with trying to create validated fitness standards and testing, and just what does it take to be a good officer from a fitness standpoint. But anyway, it was down there for about 3 years, which it seems like I can't hold a job. It sounds like 3 years is about the shelf life. But anyway, went on to back to Colorado Springs and got hired at the University of Colorado Springs. And there I got connected with the Colorado State Patrol from a mutual contact in Corpus Christi, and reached out to a gentleman named Ryan Holmes, who's now Sergeant Ryan Holmes. And he was in charge of their wellness program. And so we got connected after about 6 months of kind of playing phone tag. Then he and Trooper Charlie Kornhauser and I did a lot of work together over the next 6 years, just looking at their fitness testing, occupational standards, and trying to develop some type of a wellness initiative for them. So that's been really, but before coming to Oklahoma State, that was the majority of my experience with law enforcement. Got to do, get to periodically kind of consult with different groups and help troubleshoot different things, and maybe try and give them some usable solutions. But yeah, while I was in Colorado, I worked a little bit with the Colorado Springs Fire Department, and then did some research with 10th Group over there as well. So in that capacity, I was really more the research guy. So they had specific questions, and we try and break down their data and answer those. With the Colorado State Patrol, honestly, did a little bit of hands-on work, but mostly Ryan and Charlie were phenomenal at what they did. So I was more of a research support for them. And then with the Colorado Springs Fire Department, we actually did and ran the training programs for the academy in the morning. So me and several of my grad students would go in, and we'd train them 3 to 4 days a week and do that. So that was Colorado. About 2019, my alma mater, Oklahoma State, gave me a call and said, hey, would you be interested in maybe coming back? And so we ran down that road and kind of pursued that. So that kind of led me to where I'm at now. So since 2019, I've been here at Oklahoma State, and me and one of my colleagues in nutrition sciences founded the Tactical Fitness and Nutrition Lab. And really, our main priority is to improve the health, fitness, and occupational performance of first responders and military. As I said before, since coming here, I got to work a lot with the Stillwater Police Department, Fire Department. We do try and help support our Army ROTC program as well. And, again, they've got master fitness trainers. So a lot of what we do there is more, kind of wargaming back and forth about things that are going to be, the best solutions for them, and maybe ways to integrate different types of training into what they do. But yeah, it's been a huge blessing. I honestly, coming back to Oklahoma, I think that was the big concern. Is Oklahoma State was the job that I wanted 20 years ago. I just didn't think it was going to happen. And, in leaving Colorado, one of the big sources of kind of angst with that was I'm really invested in working with law enforcement and all that. And when I go to Stillwater, it's a smaller market, and, it's not, I don't know if I'll get to keep working in this space, and how are we going to make that work? And since I got here, the people have just been overwhelmingly supportive, and the local first responders have been amazing as far as kind of taking me in and letting me come in and kind of help with what they're doing. And we've actually branched out, and we're working with several different organizations here in state, such as Warriors Rest Foundation. And we actually got a really big grant from FEMA about, I guess, 6 months ago to develop a firefighter fitness and wellness course as well. So things have been rocking and rolling. Life is good, and no complaints on this end. But that was kind of that's probably the long story about, or the long abbreviated story about how I kind of got from where I was to where I'm at now. So.
Well, I think you're in a very unique position. I don't think there's a lot of people out there that have done, or at least that we've run into, that have done a lot of studies on fitness for law enforcement, and looking at those types of things. So I think in this world, you talked a little bit about litigation and your experience with that. And in my mind, it could have gone like 10 million different. Was it lack of training? Was it unions that didn't want their people to have standard? Like there could be so many different things. There's a lot of
Yes, all those.
yes. So there's a lot of challenges when it comes to like building these programs, when it comes from like the bureaucratic side of things. So I think the more studies that we can find that validate why this is important, can maybe change some of those minds. Have you found sort of that side of the coin? You were talking about the litigation, like how do you work within that space?
Oh man, it's like kicking a hornet's nest, honestly. I mean, it's very contentious. There's always challenges that are associated with it. Because I think, what it really gets down to is, this is going to sound really terrible, but it's not how good you need to be to do the job. It's like, how bad can you be and actually still do your job? So, yeah, I mean, it's really trying to narrow it down to what is the lowest common denominator from a fitness standpoint that will still let you be occupationally capable. Obviously we know that the more fit to a certain point, the better. But it is kind of that diminishing returns. You get to a certain point, if you get too far skewed in one direction and don't pay attention to being kind of holistically fit as well. So I mean, if you're really strong, but your cardiorespiratory fitness is terrible, that creates kind of a liability too. So yeah, I mean, as far as trying to narrow it down to the least amount of fitness you need to do the job is a real challenge. I will say this in general terms. I think, at this stage of the game, and next week, if we talked again, I may change my mind, because that kind of happens with this as you keep, progressing on. But I think really the big thing that we've been looking at is, again, just trying to make sure, one, are you a healthy human being, first and foremost? And then once you're a healthy person, now we can start layering fitness and building capacity off that. And typically, in I guess my opinion at the moment, is if you can take care of the health aspect and start layering fitness on top, typically the occupational side kind of takes care of itself, to where, they're at least reasonably fit enough to do most of what needs to be done. Now, again, you're always going to get those extraneous situations that are, really, really physically demanding, but for the most part, I mean, if we can make you a healthy person and then get you fit, and this is where it gets a little bit more challenging, but if you look at age and sex related issues, so not even necessarily saying, I mean, obviously it's same job, same task, but just saying, like, look, for your age and for your sex, if you're a healthy human being and you have a relatively decent level of fitness, odds are you're going to be able to do a pretty decent job. Now, that's not something you can create a standard off of, because that gets a whole nother set of issues. But I think that's the big thing we're looking for. Just first and foremost, let's make you a healthy human being, and then we'll start moving toward that, that tactical athlete concept.
Yeah, I find that to be the case. Is just, so I sort of have been implementing a physical fitness program at our department, and we were tasked with coming up with a program for that. And, in your mind, you have all of these little sexy avenues that you want to go, because how important it is for, what demands need to be met, if it's a fight, or if it's a sprint, or if it's a whatever. So you have all of these avenues, and you're thinking of, okay, now I'm going to do this for injury prevention, I'm going to do this for optimal whatever speed. And really, when it comes down to it, as you kind of experienced, you're just dealing with a bunch of people who really just need to get in shape, kind of, that they need to put their health first. They need to start, prioritizing just the super basics. And that's a huge barrier. You look at someone who has had maybe 10 years on the job, and just how degraded their health has become as a result of a lot of different, variables. But, you have to hit that low hanging fruit first. And I guess, my question to you is kind of as a aside from that is, when you're looking at research projects and things like that, how do you determine, or how do you pick and choose what you're going to allocate your time and energy to, when there's just such a broad spectrum of, number one, the tactical demands, obviously, there's also the health aspects, the standards aspects, all this stuff. So how do you kind of find your place in all that and prioritize what you think is important to delve into?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, probably the biggest challenge is, a lot of it becomes less of what I think is the sexiest thing to attack, because sometimes there's some really cool stuff that we can do. And we've got some pretty cool data, but a lot of it gets back down to, all right, what are the needs of the agency that we're working with? What are the needs of, the general population of law enforcement officers specifically that are going to have the biggest impacts? And that's, I think, with me and, a lot of the collaborators that I work with, that's kind of where we've chose to spend the majority of our focus is, what's the big picture items first, and then trying to get into some of those, smaller side projects that are, kind of fun, maybe a little more sexy and whatnot. But yeah, it's kind of like you were saying before, you're going to have, it's funny, like when you walk into a law enforcement agency, and this is going to sound probably terrible, I don't mean it to come off this way, but it's like walking into like a Walmart or a Target, where you're going to have you're going to have a pretty good cross section of the entire population.
Yes.
Right? And so you're going to have like some super fit people and some people that got things to work on. And and I think that's the big thing, is that you got to really try and address the needs of everybody to some extent. And typically, with the people who are really fit, like in general terms, and again, this is going to be a wild generalization, but like with SWAT teams, special teams, and stuff like that, usually those folks are pretty hooked up. So a lot of times it's more, knocking rough edges off, or, hey, I need something new with my training program, and, trying to give them some things to keep them motivated so they don't get stale and bored with training. And then you've got, that middle, percentage that, would like some help here and there. And then you got the bottom percentage that really have some pretty serious things that need to be worked on. So yeah, I mean, I think it's funny, like recently one of my colleagues told me, he's like, you're kind of a public health guy. And I'm like, I'm not public health, I'm performance guy. And then as we started talking, I'm like, oh my God, I'm public health. So it really is, it's kind of a mixture of all those things. And I think, throughout my career, like I started out like dead on performance guy, and that was my thing, like, jump higher, run faster, and strength and power and all that good stuff. And then, I think as I'm getting older and, kind of being able to take a step back and look at, okay, what's the bigger need here? What are the challenges? A lot of it is becoming a little bit more on the public health side, and looking at things like, general health parameters, and how do we just improve, things like, blood pressure and cholesterol and things like that. So yeah, it's been kind of an interesting dynamic as far as like what gets priority and, what, kind of gets moved aside. And, the great thing about it is, from a research standpoint, man, me and the folks that I work with, I mean, we'll have research coming out for years based off the stuff that we've got right now. And as you said, it really gets down to, okay, from a prioritization standpoint, what's going to have the most significant impact for the profession, and, what's going to make the biggest difference. So,
are you looking at effects of like shift work on
we're starting to do a little bit of that as well. I mean, and I think we all know, like, I mean, there's nothing about the job of law enforcement that's really like super conducive to health. So I think a lot of the stuff that we have to do is undo what the job does to you.
Yeah.
So if you're sitting in a car for 8 hours a day, and you're probably sitting like this, bad positions, and it's one of those things where with the vest, with the extra load, and there's been some of my colleagues have actually looked at blood pressure recently, like while wearing the gear. And I mean, as soon as the gear goes on, blood pressure goes up.
I believe that.
And it stays up, which is kind of interesting, because and that's, I think intuitively I probably should have known that, because anytime you're lifting weights and you got a load on your body, it raises in.
I wonder too if there's a little bit of like the lab coat syndrome, like once you put that on, you switch into your, okay, I'm on.
Yeah,
I'm in that
definitely.
like hyper vigilant state where
Absolutely.
your blood pressure will. So I wonder if there's a little bit of that too, just the load and that,
mentality.
the psychological.
Yep, absolutely. And I think those are the big questions that are out there. Is like, obviously it's probably multifactorial.
Yeah.
There's probably not any one thing, because I mean, the bottom, it was funny. I was talking to a friend of mine a long time ago who was an officer, and he said, Jerry said, the thing you don't understand is, like, if you drop a bottle of water and you pick it up, you don't think a whole lot about it. But if I drop a bottle of water and I pick it up in a uniform, like, I'm a target and I'm in a vulnerable position. And so it's always on your mind.
Mhm.
And, it is one of those things where, I mean, just, the hard thing about it is the hypervigilance is what keeps you safe,
Mhm.
but it also keeps your stress up the entire time that you're, in that state. So it's a catch 22.
Oh yeah.
Like it's actually, facilitative and debilitative at the same time.
Mhm.
Um, in keeping kind of with we were talking a little bit about performance earlier, and I want to dive into that because we want the biggest bang for our buck. We want to think of our and I know it's kind of funny that you were like, oh, I'm in public health. Oh shit, I kind of am, but we want to think of ourselves as like performance type folks.
Right.
The fact of the matter is performance can really be anything. I mean, performance is life performance. It's just function. It's how you move through the world, both in your job and at home. And so I would love to hear some of just general themes that you've discovered through your research because I know you've done a ton regarding just physical fitness and how that contributes to performance and what your metric of performance is on the job. Is it purely physical performance? Is it decision making and that kind of thing? Just to give us an idea of some of those outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, yes, it's all that. And I think that's where it gets down to is like, and you exactly said it, like performance is related to anything that we do. And I think, when we talk about the public health side of it, is a lot of like, okay, becoming a healthy person is going to improve performance downstream. I think that's the big realization I've had is that, performance is great, but it doesn't happen in isolation. And if you're not even a healthy human being, you're never going to reach your top level of performance.
Mm-hmm.
And, so looking at different metrics, we look at all the different things that you're talking about are the things we either have in line to look at or have looked at. So we've looked at measures of occupational performance and fitness performance, and try to look at the relationships between those different variables to see, is there any way to predict kind of a, what is the magic number that you need to be at as far as like how many push-ups or sit-ups or how fast you need to run a 1.5 mile run test or how many shuttles you have to go on a beat test to do your job better. And in general terms, like we'd be able to create a pretty decent profile as far as somebody who would have success in doing those different tasks. And truthfully, it's not, with a lot of those tasks, the level of fitness necessary is not it's not remarkable by any means. It's above average for probably most folks, but it's not anything that's just completely insane as far as the numbers that we're trying to put up. But when we're looking at a lot of our occupational fitness testing back when we were in Colorado, and I'm going to make a wild accusation on this, but if people could do around 40 push-ups and sit-ups and about 40 shuttles on a beep test, they did pretty well on most occupational tasks.
Mm-hmm.
Now, again, that's not saying that that's the top tier performance, but that was kind of the average of the people who seem to be successful.
And if I'm not mistaken, one of like kind of your general metric for success was you were dealing specifically with new cadets going in through the academy and basically determining their success rate based on how fit they were entering. And then I don't know if you did that same application with sort of like already officers in the field.
So we did both actually. And, kind of our source of contention was like, when we were looking at that is, the job of a cadet and the job of an officer are not the same job.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, really a cadet's job is to train. And so a lot of what we look at with cadets is survivability of training. So basically, walking in the door, are you fit enough to get through the 22 to 27 weeks of training that you have to get through to become an officer? And then, after you graduate, hypothetically, if you have no more fitness requirements from here to infinity, what would be a aspirational level of fitness that you need to be at in order to help maintain your occupational performance, or at least be, satisfactory at that. So yeah, we've actually done it in both. And really with the cadets, it was oriented on survivability and injury. So, basically like how fit do you need to be to not get injured to get through training?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas with the officers, we did actually look at occupational tasks.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Were you looking at some like statistical analysis at like sports performance type of numbers as far as like how long is an average struggle with a suspect? Like what type of movements are you typically doing on a statistically broad spectrum? Are you pushing, pulling, punching? Are you running? Or did you look at that? at all?
Yeah, we did. So, basically, we went back in and we looked at the needs analysis for, what does an officer have to do on the job in general terms? And, with, a lot of the stuff that the Cooper Institute came out with, like your general law enforcement requirements, use of force situations above and below 2 minutes, and, climbing and jumping over barriers, dodging and weaving and all that. We took all that into consideration. But what we did was we took the agency's current fitness battery that they were performing, because we're trying to find, so that's the thing when you're looking at fitness tests, is what you're trying to do is you're trying to find underlying predictors of job performance, right? So, if we know that on this task you need to be strong and you need to be powerful, we're going to go find 2 measures of strength and power that may relate to that aspect of job performance. So, when you're looking at the different testing aspects, there's obviously a couple different options. Is you can look at the job in and of itself or the task, or you can look at the underlying fitness components to predict job performance. Mm-hmm. So we did both. And the main reason was, again, trying to draw that manifest relationship between this fitness metric and that occupational task, to say people who, basically profiling them and say people that look like this tend to do just fine over here. Mm-hmm. So some of the stuff that we did is we looked at a handful of different occupational tasks. So we did, a 20-meter sprint. We did a sustained pursuit with changes of direction. So it was about 120 yards. We did, a vehicle push. We did a victim drag that was 8.54 meters with a 220-pound dummy. And then we looked at, a barrier jump using a 4-foot fence. So basically a 5-meter run up, jump over the fence, and then another 5-meter acceleration after that, and looked at the time to completion on all those things. And so for each one of those specific tasks, we had 3 to 4 subject matter experts rating people on that task as far as how well they did and whether it was a successful or not successful performance. Because that's kind of the pro and the con of what I do. Is I'm not an officer, which is actually a benefit and a problem at times. Because so it's like I've said 1,000 times, like just because you're standing in the garage doesn't make you a car. So that's the one thing, is like I can watch somebody do something, but since I don't do the job, it's difficult for me to say, well, that's not acceptable or that's acceptable, because I'm not the SME in that space. So basically we called in actual officers that were doing the job to be the SMEs and rate each one of those. And then once we got those ratings, we tried to, again, create that profile. So people who pass versus people that fail from a fitness standpoint, here's the average levels of fitness that you're seeing. And so that's kind of how we start creating that process. Now, getting that down to a specific cut score is a whole nother situation. And that was the area that we were tracking into, is trying to develop a cut score. But as you know, litigation tends to put a halt on creating cut scores. So that never actually happened. Yeah. But we did get some really good numbers. And, I know this will be shocking to you all, but, in general terms, the more fit you are, the better you perform on your occupational tasks. I know earth-shattering information today, but I will say this, guys, like this is the one thing, and it's really funny. I've got a good friend who will say, well, yeah, no joke. Did you really have to do a research study on that? Anecdotally, probably not, but when we have those numbers and people can take that back to their command staff, go, well, hey, look, this isn't just my opinion. There's actually numbers to back that up. It creates a whole different narrative.
Absolutely.
And that's what our job is like, okay, how do I give you support that you need to fight for the things that you need?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are very appreciative, because someone like yourself with the resources has been able to do that, provide those numbers. Was the work that predominantly, like the work that you're talking about, that specific study, was that done with Trooper Kornhauser?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Charlie and Ryan. Yeah.
Awesome.
So Ryan Holmes and Charlie Kornhauser. Yeah. 2 of the greatest human beings I've ever known.
Well, what about now? He just said it.
Now remember, I said 2 of the greatest. I didn't say they were the only ones.
I reached out to Charlie as well, and so I hope to talk to him too about his experience, just from being a trooper himself. I think that's a great point. Is just he might have a slightly different view. I think some of the benefit too of your background is you're watching the biomechanics too. You're not just watching if the task is performed. You're seeing, all right, that guy or that gal just nearly missed a torn ACL, or like, look at the shearing force in this change of direction, and sort of you're watching, even things like how the load is dictating how the body's moving. And for cops, it's like, well, this is just my normal, this is my everyday, so.
Yeah. Well, and that was a great thing about working with both Ryan and Charlie. Like, those guys, honestly, they are as good as some PhDs in exercise physiology that I've seen.
Wow.
I mean, they really get it, and I think that's why we've all been such a great team, is because they have a really deep understanding of the content. But yeah, I mean, but it is one of those things where, from their perspective, it gave me a lot more perspective, because I probably came in with certain ideas as far as what I thought was acceptable, and then after talking to them, you hear how things are actually done. I'm like, well, yeah, that kind of challenges what I thought. So, I mean, I think that's the benefit of the type of research that I try to do is not so much us academic people from the mountaintops going like, oh, well, here's what you should do. It really is doing it with the officer, because you guys are subject matter experts in your area. Yeah. And we have a perspective on things, and you guys have a perspective on things, and being able to combine those things together gets the best product. Because not doing the job, there's a lot of different ways to do the job. And I may come in with kind of a predisposed notion of what that would look like, but then when you talk about training and tactics and things that are actually important, it makes you go back and go, well, maybe we need to rethink what we're actually looking at.
Well, and I think your research is going to become more and more important.
Oh yeah.
In the next 10 years or so. Just, I do think there is definitely a, bare minimum of what you need to do the job, but we're seeing more and more of like these issues that become, or incidents that become really national news because they go really bad, come down a lot of times, in my view, to just either a lack of training, fitness, or hands-on experience. Yeah. And so, I do think as we look at how we can make policing better and these situations turn out better, we're going to be looking more at a better baseline of fitness and ability in hands-on tactics, not being overly tool reliant and stuff. So I do think that this area of research is going to become more and more important. And people like you who are doing it will probably be leaned on quite a bit, just looking at some of those things. Again, going back to that statistical analysis, like how long are fights normally? And I think every department is going to be a little bit different depending on their use of force guidelines. Like what is acceptable to their community. Are you going to see more punches? You're going to see more taser deployments. You're going to see more kind of wrestling and team tactics. I think it's going to really vary, which makes your job a lot harder.
Yeah. I mean, which makes it awesome, though. I mean, I think that's the funny thing about it, is like, it is the most maddening, frustrating, awesome, and fantastic thing I've ever got to do.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. And when I say maddening, is because about the time you think you got the answer, you're like, oh, that's not going to work, and here's why.
Yeah. It's funny too, because kind of your perspective of things reminds me of, we were talking to Tex McCulkin from Power Athlete. I don't know if you remember him, but so we were just in Austin staying with him, visiting him, and we had a couple of late nights just talking about all of this stuff. And he's actually putting together a talk for TSAC, and specifically about sprinting and sprint training and that kind of thing for tactical populations. And we brought up some stuff to him that I was surprised he hadn't considered, just based on our background, which is, well, like, are you doing anything to talk about the conditions of which you're sprinting in? And he's kind of like, well, yeah, change your direction, all that stuff. I'm like, yeah, but I mean, it rains all winter long for us.
Especially where you are, yeah.
and it's extreme. Like our area is extremely hilly. I've never gotten in a foot pursuit that wasn't very downhill or very uphill. Yeah. Like, it's very
mostly downhill.
Yeah.
It's a rare.
Which with extra gear on makes going downhill even more awesome, right?
It's dicey. You want to plan your approach very tactically, but yeah, just little things like that. And he's like, I gotta write this stuff down. It's like, well, how did you not consider that? Like, there's certain things, just sort of the terrain. And so it is good to kind of have a boots on the ground person to kind of provide that perspective.
It adds so much balance. And like I said, fortunately for Tex and I, you guys are doing that and we aren't. So yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that, to your point, I mean, that's the thing too, is like when you look at like sprinting, so we're gonna, when we do our sprint work, it's obviously not the type of sprint. I mean, there's obviously similarities to what you do with athletes, but if you look at the volumes, if you look at the quantities and stuff like that, we're just we're trying to build on it and touch on it, but we don't have hours on end to train sprinting like we do with an athlete. And I think the other aspect of that too is, once you put the gear on, depending on what type of gear you're wearing, it does change mechanics. And our folks here in Stillwater, they were looking at going to the vests that have all the gear on the top versus around the belt. And so we did. So the question is, hey, is there any benefit to doing this? And everybody said that, hey, it feels better on the lower back, which is great. I think the things that we're going to be looking at in the next year is like, well, all right, are you robbing Peter to pay Paul though? So there's going to be some downstream effect. Where is it popping up at? But we did some just basic stuff looking at performance, and so we took them through a couple like occupational agility tests, a couple of shooting tasks, and then just an all-out sprint over like 20 yards. So they pop out of a vehicle and then sprint 20. And the thing that we saw is with the belt, with the majority of the equipment around the belt versus the external carrier, I mean, we saw like arms crossing the midline of the body because, I mean, you've got to clear the belt. So to do that, you end up swinging wider versus when they put the vest on, they were more upright with better form. So the funny thing was, like, even though the vest with the gear on it weighed slightly more, they were still faster because of how it did not change their mechanics. So yeah, there's a lot of different little things like that you go, oh, well, that kind of makes sense, but I wouldn't have thought of it if I hadn't seen it. So
you're talking my language. I was just, Kelly and I were just talking. I've got one of those what are they called, the assault treadmills.
It's basically like the oh shit, what is the name of it? It's the self-propelling treadmill. It looks like a woodway.
Oh yeah, like a curve kind of.
Yes,
right?
yeah. And I wanted to look at gait analysis, like out of uniform, in uniform,
Yeah.
So at our department, we have you have your choice. You can wear an external vest or an internal, carry it on the belt or out. And I've actually gone back and forth. So I was on a bicycle for 2 years, and I found on that the external vest was too much on like my traps, and it pulled me too much forward.
Right.
And you really don't have to sprint because you can chase them down on your bike.
Right.
It's a lot more effective. But now that I'm back in a vehicle, it feels more comfortable for me to have the external vest for those reasons, like lower back issues. Just sort of, it feels more balanced. I try to keep myself not loaded with a ton of equipment anyway, but so it's interesting. I think that type of thing, and looking at footwear, like within your choices, are you wearing like a really restrictive boot, or do you have something like some of those a little bit more minimalist or
sort of Under Armour style boot?
Right.
Yeah, those are all things that fascinate me. I would love to look at that.
Well, and so here, like, I guess I'll give you the preview. So we're going to look at all that, but using like some different biomechanical analysis equipment. So we're going to be doing some work with this company named Sensor Medica, that they're going to allow us to actually look at the force, the impact, and how gait changes and all that. So hell, maybe we might be able to fly up that way and do something. That'd be awesome.
Oh, that would be so cool.
That would be so cool. I'm already putting as many people who will go through some assessments that I've been doing, and even just simple things like just having them looking at Achilles restriction based on 10 years of boot wear and that kind of thing. We know what a catastrophic injury that will be. And it really, like, that's a lot of times that just happens in training.
That is one of our most high injury rates is Achilles, just from a planting motion. Yeah, because people just aren't trained. And then, once a year they're being asked to do a simple, like even kneeing a bag.
Yeah, and they kneeing a bag, knee
their foot.
Come back, strain the Achilles, and boom. Yeah.
And it's, so, I mean, our argument is always going to be, let's train more and more often. There's so many benefits with what we've already talked about. But it's convincing those that need to be convinced that
Well, and that's exactly it. And I mean, and I think that's the whole thing, is like when you start looking at the cost of equipment, things like that. I mean, unless you can show the downstream revenue savings from it, unfortunately, sometimes that's the number one factor on whether you get something or not get something. So, and I won't name names of anybody, but there was a company that came in that had a widget that they wanted us to look at. And so for each one of these, it was $500. And it's like, okay, well, look, so I got to be able to go back and justify why this is worth $500 versus like, a vest that will literally stop knives and bullets and stuff like that. So, at the end of the day, like, yeah, that's a cool training idea, but I got to have something at the end of the day that shows, okay, this is how much more benefit you're going to get from it, how it actually saves lives and
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So it's an interesting space, and kind of like you were saying, like sometimes, I mean, the bottom line, you got to make the better bad choice. None of the gear is going to be super conducive to performance, and once you put it on, like things are going to be harder just by design.
Mhm.
So it's trying to look at profiling that and saying, hey, for these types of maybe I don't say MOS, but specific job task and different assignments, maybe this is more beneficial than that. And I think those are the things that I think we're really interested in looking at is how do we help you guys on a daily basis figure out some of these questions you have. But it's funny, like just this conversation, like my head's already spinning like on 1,000 different things. But
Yeah.
I think that's the big thing is like most of the research that we do is really based off of what your needs are. And so it's almost kind of like what they do with in professional athletics or sports science centers, where they go like, okay, here's our issue, how do we help either create a research study to solve that problem, or how do we look at information we've already got to maybe answer that question.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's the fun thing about the job for sure.
Yeah, and Lexi's fascination is kind of the gait aspect of it, how it changes your biomechanics. But one of the things, just using sprinting as an example, and you can derive a lot from just sprinting, because it is something that has not changed throughout time. We will always still run after people. It's never not going to happen. But one of the things that fascinates me about it is only about half the time does it really result in like a tackle. And also, just as a side note, a lot of people don't know how to take someone to the ground after full sprinting. And then the other half the time, you have to work on a deceleration. You have to be making a decision as you get within, say, 5-10 yards of that person. You have to know what you're going to do. And so there's this sort of deceleration phase, a decision-making phase, and then a mental recovery on how best to take that person into custody or whatever, which is a whole other realm of like when we go out and I sprint, like, yesterday my programming had me sprinting like 400-meter repeats and that kind of thing. But it's like, that's great. But at the end, there's no task for me. I'm not radioing my location. There needs to be more of that, I think, into kind of what we do, because the speed is just the stress inoculation. The community, if we're talking dollars and cents, the community wants to know what we're going to do once we've done our job, essentially, which is catch up to the suspect,
Well, and I think, and that's a great point, because I think, part of it is like when you're training, like anything that you do that is less than, the full maximal effort on any activity, you're going to get the training effects are going to be slightly different, right? So if if you're trying to radio somebody while you're doing a 400-meter, you're obviously going to slow down when you do that. Mm-hmm. So I think there's that combination of, are there times like in the training cycle where that might be more appropriate? Like here's a heavy day and a light day. Heavy day, I'm going to go full on. Mm-hmm. Light day, I may throw in some more decision-making and task relevant things in combination with that sprinting. So you get kind of a combination of the two. So you still get a training effect, but then you're also getting some of that decision-making under stress as well.
The cognitive.
And even if it's just, doing, long division or something, it's not the same thing, but it really just gets down to processing. Mm-hmm. Like, and the more that you practice it, the better you get at doing it. So, I think that's one of the things that we're going to be looking at again in the near future too, is taking some of the things that we've seen in like the special operations community, from like a mental skills training standpoint, and trying to bring that to the first responder level with some of the newer techniques and tactics that we're using. Mm-hmm. So
that's great. I just, all this fascinates me, and like you said, your brain is going a mile a minute, so is mine. And mostly it's with
mine's going like a half a mile a minute, I'd say. It's a little
which is fine.
But most of it is just the complexities of all this as we talk about it, and
there's a lot of noise. Yeah, there really is.
So, just from looking from department to department, if they have what their leadership's like, what their terrain is like, what their training. I mean, it's just, there's no standard.
Just the weather.
Yeah.
And
Well, and that's the thing is that, training in South Texas versus Portland versus
oh yeah.
Washington. I mean, so there's enough similarities in what has to be done, but like I said, the environmental constraints, I mean, they can dramatically vary.
Yeah.
And the thing that's been really cool for me too is like, with a lot of the agencies, like I've got to go out and do like some of the task training and stuff like that. And I am very poor at all of it, but I think that was the big thing, is like just getting a sense of what they have to go through.
Yeah.
I remember, when they were in Texas, I got to go do an alert training, which I was the worst, arguably, at everything that we did, which I should be, but nonetheless, I just remember doing a low crawl in South Texas with 110-degree weather, full gear on, and reaching through Johnson grass like that high, going, dear God, I hope I don't grab a snake. And and like, well, everybody's watching, better pull on, and there's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
I think just again, for me, that experience of getting to do some of those things to again, not fully understand it, but get a better understanding of what the physical demands are, make it a lot easier to come up with some of those different things, as far as things to study or ways to improve performance and things like that.
In keeping with that, I'd like to ask you, if you were in our position where you're sort of implementing a physical fitness program and there's an emphasis on injury prevention, that kind of thing. In my mind, there's what we were just talking about, which I feel like is a little bit more, we'll call it performance as we understand performance. Sure. And then there's sort of the screening of general function. And so, we've needed to use a broad sweeping, we've used FMS because it's just, it's a thing we can use our backgrounds to kind of put someone through an assessment. Because we're working for the city, we need a very, formal sort of setting, standardized. So we've been using FMS, and then obviously like a little bit of our own knowledge tacked onto that as a general screening. But I'm curious from your perspective, what would you be utilizing as sort of that functional movement screening? Some movements that you would utilize, or some themes that you would try to utilize to determine where people are at physically wise, and then also performance wise, which I know I've seen. I mean, you use like vertical jump or sprints or agility tests and things like that. So that's what I want to sort of impart on our department, is you have the option to do the functional movement screening, but then additionally, if you wanted to do more of a performance based thing, you could also do that. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you're dead on, because I think you're asking two separate questions there. Mm-hmm. So, and that, with the FMS, so people, I don't say people love it or hate it, but I mean, it can be a polarizing topic depending on who you talk to.
Yeah.
I think it's fine. Like we just got through doing 48 FMSs with our fire department about a month ago. And we've done about as many with our police department as well. And I think the thing that by and large it helps me with is it gives me a big snapshot of, a general snapshot of movements for individuals. But then also it lets us attack kind of the big picture. It's like, okay, what are some common themes and issues that we're seeing pop up? Mm-hmm. I know it's going to be shocking, but shoulders and hamstrings are usually always like an abomination. I mean, it's a problem. Mm-hmm. So, I think when we go into it to develop like basic training programs for people to improve fitness, we can go into it with the mindset of like, okay, look, in general terms, hamstrings and shoulders are a problem. So we're going to be squeezing a lot of different prehab type things that address those areas now into the equation, realizing that it's probably going to be an issue. So I think, if you look at FMS, like it's going to give you a basic snapshot of movement. And I think the fitness aspect is going to, again, let you look at the fitness. Because I think the problem is, a lot of times people look at FMS and they go like, well, it doesn't tell us anything about fitness level. Well, that's not why it was designed. Mm-hmm. It's designed to give you here's how this person moves in general terms. And then from a fitness standpoint, here's what their fitness looks like. Because you can have really good fitness and move terribly. Mm-hmm. So basically, you've built a lot of fitness onto a poor foundation. So I think the things that I like about it is, like you said, with the experience and the background you guys have, especially, is you can, it lets you get eyes on people. So you can start seeing like movement discrepancies and challenges that you may need to work on from a training perspective, both globally and individually as well.
Yeah. And from the user standpoint, it's far less intimidating than if I say, hey, you need to carb up because we're going to do a fitness test. Like people are like, holy shit, so
well, and guys, in full disclosure, one of the other things, like a lot of times with agencies, like doing that FMS test, it's kind of a low barrier to entry.
Yes,
In the fitness program, because the people who are really good get exposed and the people who are bad may get exposed as well.
Right. Well, and we have too, like some of our very fit people, again, they'll do it and they're doing it next to someone who's maybe not as fit or not as sports related. and realize like,
right.
Well,
I have some better movement patterns here, so it's interesting to see.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's kind of the charm in it, is when you're starting out from that perspective, like it really is looking at mitigating injury risk.
Yes.
And that's the framework we've gone into it with, like, hey, look, like this is really to help reduce your risk of potential injury.
Mm-hmm.
In reality, so there's been some other research done with some of my other colleagues that we've looked at. So FMS alone may not be the best predictor of injury, but when you look at FMS in combination with fitness, it tends to pop a lot more.
I mean, well, that's
not shocking, right? Yeah. So I mean, if you're a terrible mover and your cardiorespiratory fitness is low, odds are you're probably gonna struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And the hard, the one I don't want to say it's a knock. The one thing about FMS that I've noticed, like with younger individuals, is it tends to predict injury less with the groups that I've worked with. Now, that doesn't mean that that's in every situation. But I know, like when you get to be like my age, when you got a little bit more reps and wear and tear on you, it tends to be a little bit better predictor because there's more mileage, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that's the big thing, is like just those patterns over time tend to start popping the longer you do stuff and the longer you stay active.
Well, and it may be predictive for those young people, but at a further down.
Yeah, and that's exactly it, right? So it's not necessarily like, I think that's what happens is like people will take it and they look at it in the context of like a year.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, we did it, nobody got hurt. I'm like, well, yeah, nobody got hurt yet, but injury studies are like really a challenge. And honestly, a lot of our grad students, I try and steer them away from doing that stuff, just because like with injury, it's like you almost got to get sick or die to win. It's like insurance, right? So it's like, it's really hard to say when an injury is going to happen, but looking at it and you say like, look, your opportunity for injury is greater, but unfortunately in the context of research study, I say unfortunately, this is terrible. If somebody doesn't get hurt, I can't say definitively where that happens.
Yeah.
So right. I think that's where you got to go, like, look, like your long-term risk is going to be elevated if you're a poor mover. And I think that's where the charm is in doing it. It's not necessarily that, hey, we did it, we didn't see anything now. It's okay, is this telling me something that may be telling you the story that happens down the line?
So if you were going to do like if you were going to do a movement screening, be it FMS or something else, in conjunction with some sort of low hanging fruit fitness or capacity testing, what would you recommend in terms of, I don't know, like a department like ours?
Okay, so question then. So cadets or officers?
Officers.
Okay. That changes the conversation completely then.
But also, you should know that our cadets are not asked to do.
That's the other aspect.
Yeah, they're not. It's not like maybe what you've seen in normal.
So State Trooper Academy is going to be like, that's going to be like Paris Island compared to, right. What we are doing at the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Center is much more classroom and the occasional group workout.
And some of that has been even pared back due to COVID restrictions.
So we're going to stay away from the academy side and have you address maybe the officer side.
Yeah.
Okay. So the even more difficult side of it.
Yes.
Cool. Because so question, do you guys have any mandatory standards? So I assume there's no standard as far as what you have to do. Okay, fair enough.
For those listening,
for those just listening, I was just taking my pulse.
Yeah, that's fair. So I think, this is, for you guys, this is the challenge, is it's really hard to get a state of the state without having some kind of a standard in place. Mm-hmm. And right now I'm currently dealing with similar situations where we don't have a mandatory fitness test that they have to do every year. Mm-hmm. So I think, even starting out, and this is definitely not a decision for you guys, but if you guys could do some kind of mandatory non-punitive fitness test, at least at that point you start getting an idea of where people are Because the sad reality is, like, a lot of times people don't want to do those tests for a multitude of reasons. And to be honest with you, like, when I get an email that comes across my desk that says I need to take some kind of a training that I don't really want to take, I get disgruntled with it too. So I get it. But the reality of it is, like, having some way to measure some baseline fitness and then measure that over time is really helpful. And we had a situation, I'm going to go off on a tangent, then I'll come back around. But we had a situation where, one person had told me, like, hey, I think this is all bull and we don't need to be doing this. Like, push-ups are stupid. And he goes, about 2 months before I have to go in and take my mandatory test, I start doing push-ups, and then I don't do them again until 2 months before my test again. And so my question was like, well, right, but if you didn't have that test, would you do it? He's like, well, yeah, that's a good point. So I think having some kind of a mandatory fitness test in general, I think in general terms, people don't like to look bad in front of their colleagues. So for some folks, it's going to motivate them to do something, and it may not be fantastic, but at least it starts giving them the thought process that I probably need to do something from a fitness standpoint, so I don't embarrass myself in front of my colleagues.
And just to kind of get into a detail of it, I know you've used the push-up as just kind of a muscle endurance type thing. Do you have just a 3 exercise or something that you lean on or would lean on in an ideal setting for that non-punitive type thing?
Well, so this is the funny thing is, so like recently, like with the agency I work with, they literally gave me carte blanche freedom to do anything I wanted to do.
Wow.
Right, which sounds amazing until you start getting into it, and you're like, well, hang on. So we're gonna do this, but some people aren't gonna be able to do that. This is gonna create a barrier. That's gonna be a problem. With the amount of time it takes to get this many people through in this amount of time, it doesn't make sense to be changing weights in and out. And so a lot of it gets down to a structural issue too, where you're like, okay, if I got to run 60 people through in an hour,
logistics,
I don't have time to do like some of the fitness testing stuff that I would do in a high performance institute. Like I was talking to one colleague of mine who has not had a lot of experience in law enforcement, but has had a lot in athletics. And so they were writing a grant to work with law enforcement. He's like, well, we're going to run force plate data on them, and we're going to bring in 6 different force plates, and we're going to get all these people through. I'm like, well, right, but there's still processing time. He's like, well, this will be easy enough if you do this. I'm like, okay. I mean, and maybe they're better than I am, which is highly probable. But I think you start getting bogged down with a lot of the logistic issues. So like with the funny thing about it is, like, push-ups, sit-ups, and our 20-meter multi-stage fitness test or beep test, in most cases, tend to predict fitness relatively well and job task performance. And the reality of it is with push-ups and sit-ups, I don't think there's magic in push-ups and sit-ups. I just think in general terms, more fit people can do more push-ups and sit-ups, and it's a pretty decent metric of just general fitness. So there's more exotic things that you can do. But I think when you're looking at, the time and things like that, you got to look at, running those in a large group. I mean, I would love to do a hex bar deadlift with everybody that we have, but the problem is that requires me to go in, probably give them up to 5 trials on the hex bar deadlift to make sure that, they're getting a true 1 RM attempt. And then, for people that aren't familiar with it, does that create a possibility for injury? And so again, you start getting bogged down with certain things.
What do you think about isometrics?
So that's what we do a lot of, is we have a lag back chain dynamometer. Which is just basically, I mean, for people that don't know, it's nothing sexy at all. You just put a handle on a scale and pull. Mm-hmm. And so like when you buy those leg back dynamometers cost like $600 or so if you buy them like from fitness suppliers. We actually just recently bought a crane scale, and we're hooking those up to the handles and things like that, and just created a box. So it's about $250 versus $600, so I can make more of them. But yeah, I mean, usually the isometrics, like, it gives a decent idea of some different aspects of performance. But I think from a time, energy, and effort standpoint, it gives us a quick snapshot of their general strength, and it's relatively quick. Mm-hmm. Which for me is key, because instead of having to look at all these different attempts, because like, okay, you got the best of 2 to 3 attempts in order to pull as much load as you can, and then we can get you out and onto the next test.
Yeah.
So from a time and efficiency standpoint, it does help. Now, the challenge with it is we do know that, in a lot of cases, dynamic movements, like, if you're looking at like a squat or a hex bar, it does tend to predict success in other metrics better than maybe an isometric test. But I think it's, when we talk about, the better bad choice at this point, a lot of what we do is isometric.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I love the idea of incorporating both. You know, it's just from working with that population, the Walmart population demographic that you're talking about, that broad scope,
Right.
or doing certain dynamic movements. Like, there's a lot of officers, like, if I saw them do a vertical jump, I would be scared for them. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So
Yeah.
it's, you know, it's just a kind of a combination I'm thinking would be
Yeah.
valuable.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, and I think, when you look at things like the vertical jump, like it does give you a general idea of like power. But the thing that we've seen is, when you look at the vertical jump in particular, like it's a surrogate measure of power. It's not a true measure.
Mm-hmm.
So, if somebody who is 100 pounds jumps, 24 inches, and somebody who's 200 pounds jumps 24 inches, well, they both jump the same height, but the person who's heavier is producing a whole lot more power.
Yeah.
So a lot of what we've done is we've even gone back in and used, it's called the Sayers equation, where we'll calculate a power in watts and then break it down to here's how much power you create per kilogram of body mass as well, which is also kind of cool too, because that equalizes a lot of things for the sex related differences too.
Yeah.
Like, hey, in general terms, like in relative, like, based off your body mass, you produce this much power per kilogram of body mass. So that's actually a pretty good look as well for us. But yeah, like you said, with some of the tests that we run, so right now we have kind of our standard testing battery that we take people through. And just so you guys know, like what we've been doing to try and, take a general snapshot of overall health and wellness. And then probably what will happen over the years as these things naturally progress is a lot of things starts getting whittled down as we start figuring out, okay, what metrics really tell us what we need to know and what's just extra stuff. But the first thing we'll do height and weight. We'll do body composition, doing an in-body test. And quite frankly, I wouldn't be doing that if I hadn't been given some startup money at Oklahoma State to buy an in-body. So if you can afford it, it's fantastic. I can literally teach a drunk monkey how to run it, so it's super easy. But if not, probably what I'd lean on is just a real simple circumference measurement.
Yeah.
So looking at waist to hip ratio, so you get a general measure of just health in general terms. Because I had one agency contact me one time that we used to do body comp testing with them. So I did the 3 site and ran through all these folks, and this one fellow that had been with the academy before said, "Hey, I'm taking over again, and I'd like to do skinfold assessments. What do you recommend?" I'm like, "Well, why are you doing it?" And I said, "Are you really wanting to look at changes in body fat, or you just want to measure their health?" He's like, "Well, I'm just more concerned about their health." I'm like, "Well, let's do circumference."
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a lot of it is that, just because you can do something doesn't mean you have to do it. It's just like what's going to give you the answer to the question you're looking for. So there's a tool out there called Myotape, which is pretty cool because what it basically has like a little handle on it, and you wrap a tape line around somebody, and then you can punch on that handle and cinch it up. It actually, it stays on them. So you can actually take a step back and get it centered up. So that, that takes out a lot of the error with people just doing the waist circumference when it's not level and all that. So that's a $5 versus $6,000 solution. So that would be something I think would definitely pay dividends just as far as looking at general health metrics. But yeah, kind of moving on from there. So we do, again, our height, weight, our body composition. Then we'll do a hand grip test.
Yeah.
So we'll do, left side, right side, then switch it up. Then we'd go into vertical jump. On that, we use a jump mat because I worked with a group one time where they didn't take the first measurement correctly. So they had one group like reach as high as they could, and then the other group basically just kept the shoulder blade depressed. So everybody, so everybody's numbers were completely elevated. I'm like, okay, well that's too much variation for me to have to deal with between testers. So we went to the jump mat, which, I mean, again, it just measures vertical displacement time. So the time you're off the mat is going to give you an estimation of how high you jump. So we'll use that. Then we do go to the leg back dynamometer next. Okay, then we'll do push-ups and sit-ups. Typically on the push-ups, we use like a yoga block instead of a closed fist. So one, we can standardize that. Plus it reduces the risk of a red touch. So to make sure that there's no issues with that if we're working with, the different, males and females and whatnot. Right now we do have the pull-up in the assessment, but there is a basement effect on that one. So there is a fair number of people who cannot do a pull-up.
Yeah.
So some of that is related to the fact that they don't have the strength to do it. Others is like they've had previous injuries. Right now, we do have it in the battery, and a lot of that is because it doesn't take very long to do, and we just kind of want to see, so we want to see what we get from it. And then immediately from there, we'll go down to the third, well, to the basement or the parking garage, and we got our 20-meter multi-stage fitness test set up down there. So, and all in all, like when you look at that battery, like after they've done like a 5-minute dynamic warm up, and usually we let them do it kind of self-selected where they just get themselves ready to go. It takes about 20 minutes to get like one person through. And that's if we're really taking our time. So it doesn't really take a huge amount of time to run through
That's
it.
great.
We can go relatively quick. And that's really similar to the fitness battery that we had in Colorado when we were running 60 people through in an hour.
Wow.
So,
Jay, do you my my instinct tells me that the amount of coaching that you provide during these assessments is just enough so that they don't get injured.
yep.
But you're not going to give them performance cues that are, going to skew the test or whatever. So
Yeah.
is
And
that,
honestly,
about right?
yeah, that's accurate. Yeah, most of the tests that we're doing are relatively self-explanatory that don't
Mhm,
require a whole lot of coaching. I mean, push-ups and sit-ups, like they've all done those in Academy.
mhm.
The iso mid thigh pull is the only other one that that's the only one that probably requires a lot of coaching, and that's really just to make sure that they're getting the torso vertical.
Mhm.
Yeah, and trying to get the knees under the bar. So basically they're not putting excessive strain on the lower back. So really trying to get into that power position, like if you're going to do a Olympic lift.
Mhm. Okay.
That's the only one that really requires a lot of coach. Well, it doesn't even require a whole lot of coaching because basically once we get the chain, so I'll demo it. So we'll do like a tell, show, do model,
Mhm.
and once they kind of see the position they're supposed to get in, it's pretty straightforward. So yeah, it doesn't really take a whole lot amount of time to do it. I think the biggest, and if you look at what we've got, it doesn't really require a whole lot of equipment.
That's awesome. And so you guys are compiling all this data that you're getting
Yep.
from different law enforcement agencies. And what do you hope to be able to out with that data?
Yeah, so a handful of things. So I think, one is creating some different normative data for different agencies out there. So I recently got through doing a study with some of my colleagues in Brazil. And so we just published a paper in the Journal of Strength Conditioning Research that has close to 8,000 officers in it. So, things like the broad jump, push up, sit up, and things of that nature. And then the 2.4 kilometer or 1.5 mile run. So we've got like numbers for, close to, 7,000-8,000 people.
That's incredible.
And there's a pretty good split between males and females. So we can look at it from both standpoints. So I think one, to have some of those numbers out there is useful, just so, I mean, bottom line is we all like to measure to a certain extent.
Mhm.
So, just to kind of see, okay, how do you meet, how do you look like other officers, and, where do you kind of fit into that? So, looking at developing percentile rankings and stuff like that. And we've got a fair number of studies out right now that do provide some of that normative data that folks can look at. Because I remember like years ago, like with the Cooper Institute, they had a couple of tests. Well, they also have their percentile ranking charts. But if you look at the test, I believe the only two that were done with officers were the 300-meter run and the vertical jump. And I think they had about 500 people, maybe in both. So like the numbers we have are beyond that.
Oh yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that's so rare. So rare.
Yeah. And I think that's part of it is that, looking at, I think most people would assume that an officer needs to be more fit than the general population. So, in a lot of cases, officers will score, better than the general population on most measures. But, when we compare it to other officers, like, well, how do I actually stack up based off my colleagues? So that's one of the things that we're trying to do is to do that. I think, some of the other things that we're trying to look at long-term wise is, and like, you said before, Lexi, it gets more challenging, is looking at occupational standards.
Mhm.
And so, is there a minimum threshold that you need to be meeting to perform your job and do it well? And, some of the challenges that go along with that is sometimes the window of success for a specific job task is pretty wide.
Mhm.
So like, when we're talking about that victim drag, so we had people pull a 220-pound dummy at 8.54 meters. And the reason that we did that is the average weight of an officer in that association was 205 pounds. So we figured, duty belt and gear, that was about right. and then it was 8.54 meters because that was how far it was from the center of our median of the intersection to the shoulder of the road. So because it was a state patrol organization, we thought, okay, that's a reasonable distance to have to pull somebody. So I couldn't say, hey, pull them 500 meters because, I mean, that's not probably reasonable. So anyway, we saw scores that range from 3.86 seconds to 18.5 seconds, and it was determined that everybody passed. So the problem is like, yeah, so basically it's like, well, then don't worry about it, just do it. Because I mean, at that rate, it's hard to assess like what's good and what's not. But what we did see is like the average time it took to do that was right around a little over 6 seconds, just under 7. So looking at that, we kind of looked at the profiles of the people who were, you know, on average, hitting the average speeds. And, you know, that gave us some insight as far as like, okay, to do this job, you probably need to be about this fit. So, you know, but I think here's, and, you know, kind of I don't know if this is answering your question, I'm probably just ranting now, but some of it is, it's like you said, it's weird. There's a physical side to it, and then there's the perceptual decision-making side. Mm-hmm. And if you have poor physical abilities, to some extent, you might be able to make up for some of those because you have really good perceptual and decision-making skills. So it's like elite sports. You'll have some athletes that are remarkable at nothing, but somehow they've managed to reach a certain level of qualification. Mm-hmm. And the same thing, I mean, that's the same thing with anything we do in life. Like sometimes people find out alternative ways to get things done and they can be successful, but in general terms, we want to make sure from a perceptual decision-making side and from a physical standpoint, both those skills complement each other, and that at a certain point to give you the best opportunity for success. Yeah. So if one fails, you have the other to rely on.
Well, it's like the rookie that goes sprinting after the suspect, and then the veteran shows up in his car around the other side of the alley and like,
exactly.
Got him.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's exactly it. Yeah. So, I mean, there's, again, you know, and kind of to your point earlier, like fitness is one of those tools that you have that it's another tool, right? And so I think, as you had mentioned before, like in the current climate, you know, with all the scrutiny that's being placed on law enforcement, you know, that's one of the things that's going to have to probably be considered in the future, because if you don't have fitness as a tool, then your opportunity to use that is going to be reduced. So you're going to have to go to something more lethal to control that situation.
Exactly. And is that going to become litigation? You know, is that going to become on the department for failure to train? You know, I think those are all things that, again, like I said, are going to become very important in the next
I'm convinced that's why I'm doing the job I'm doing, is because our department can foresee, you know, being held liable for not providing a status of or some sort of guidance for physical fitness, because
and wellness and
exactly, because they do for, you know, tactics and firearms and all those other components. And so yeah, I think that, you know, there's definitely a large CYA component too, and that's fine with me because shit, I like to do it anyway. So
yeah.
Well, I mean, and I think the reality, and again, this is me not being in your space, but outside looking in. I guess if I'm a chief or, you know, I'm an administrator, would I rather get sued because I let an officer that I didn't think was fit for duty out on the road and then somebody got killed and I got sued by a civilian? Or is it a better look to say, hey, we didn't think they were fit and we let them go, and then have that person sue them? I don't know which one of those you want to be. I mean, it's kind of a bad way to go either way, but you know, to me, I'd rather take my chances of saying like, look, we were doing due diligence and we felt like this might be a problem.
Well, and at the end of the day, are you beholden to your citizens? I mean, that's who we work for, or your employees, right? I mean, that's kind of, but and there is a mix, and I think that's what the general population don't realize, like how hard it is for administrators to make those decisions where you're getting, you know, hammered from both sides as far as litigation goes, or, you know, like labor laws or unions and citizens, and
it's a mess. Yeah, which I think that's been the most interesting thing for me, is learning about all the minutia that goes around it and trying to figure out like, okay, well, how do we still get you what you need? And the good thing about me kind of being a third party too is like, since I don't actually work in the organization, I can kind of just say, well, here's what we saw.
Yeah.
And, you know, from here, like I can give guidance, but I mean, at the end of the day, you got to figure out what level of risk are you willing to accept and kind of make that decision. But, you know, I think the other aspect too is like, when you look at an officer who's unfit, like, you know, at what level does the organization have a responsibility to protect them from themselves? I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
and You know, it's funny you say that because a friend of mine said that's one thing the public doesn't really think about with policing, but oftentimes we are protecting you from yourselves.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
so we should be able to do that.
100%.
Yeah, so we should be able to do that with our,
Yeah.
you know, our own employees. But yeah, I lost my train of thought though. I had something else.
Sorry. Yeah,
that's
just
okay.
it is such a giant can of worms. But you know, I know we've been going for a little while, and I'm sure this will hopefully be the first of many conversations with you. I'm really glad that
Yeah.
you took the time. You know, this is something that's a bit of a passion project for us. Our podcast too. I mean, the concept behind all of this is really it's kind of how we perceive just the officer as being a leader within the community and a leader within the department. And it just so happens that we think sport and training and fitness it is such a driving force for that mentality. And how can we be the most effective, you know, officers for a community? And this, it all, well, a huge part of it, I think, goes back to this gap in training, which is fitness and these standards. We've gotten so far away from it. So it's definitely invigorating to talk to someone who's still on the forefront doing this research for us, for me to pull from, so that I can get the grant money, get the funding that we need for the stuff at the department that we're trying to do,
buy-in from
or just the buy-in. So we're immensely grateful. Is there anything that you wanted to touch on or mention that we haven't asked you or talked about?
No, I mean, honestly, I think, well, probably 1,000 things, but I think that's what we more of these, right? But no, I think that's the big thing is, like, you know, for your all's agency and, you know, anybody else who's listening to this, if you guys have questions or things that you are trying to find answers to, reach out. And it's not lip service. Like, I mean, worst case scenario, I say, I don't know, and we try and find some solution. But I think that's the thing that drives me, is like really, again, trying to help the people who are actually doing the job. And I don't ever want it to become one of those things where I'm sitting in my office dreaming up fun research studies that I think are cool, but then the people that are doing the job go like, well, that's not how we do it, and that's not worthwhile. So I think that would be kind of, I guess, the parting shot, which is like, hey, if anybody has any interest in anything related to this topic, then I'm always happy to help, and you know, our team is here to assist you in any way we can. And yeah, don't hesitate to reach out. I don't have secrets, and happy to share anything I got.
That's awesome. And we'll we can get your information maybe after we stop recording. We'll just link to it under, if that's okay with you. Okay.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Jay. It was a pleasure kind of re-meeting you and talking with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, likewise, guys. Thank you.